The hand on her arm was a manacle of bespoke wool and entitlement. Dr. Marcus Thorne did not grip, he branded. His touch was a claim, a public filing of ownership that had long since expired in private. Alara Vance felt the familiar cold dread bloom in her stomach, a toxic orchid she had spent a year learning to uproot. He had cornered her by the towering ice sculpture of a swan, its slow, elegant melt, a mockery of her own dissolving composure. "Don't walk away from me, Alara," Marcus murmured, his voice a low growl meant only for her, yet his posture was one of relaxed, magnanimous concern for any onlookers at the St. Jude's Benefactors Gala. He was performing. He was always performing. "We're not finished." "We are," she replied, her own voice a whisper of sound thin as a thread. She did not pull her arm away. That would create a scene, and her entire existence with Marcus had been a masterclass in avoiding scenes. Her survival had been predicated on silence, on absorbing his tempests until they blew themselves out. But she had left him 3 days ago. She had packed a single bag, walked out of the penthouse they shared, his penthouse, and had not looked back. The silence she craved was not the absence of his shouting, it was the absence of him. He leaned closer, his breath a foul mix of expensive scotch and indignation. "You have an obligation. To me. To this hospital. You don't just disappear. You are embarrassing me." His fingers tightened, the pressure a sharp, specific pain that shot up to her shoulder. He was working from an outdated file. He was operating from a version of her that had never been entirely accurate and was now definitively obsolete. The Alara who endured was gone. The woman who stood before him was a stranger to him, hollowed out by fear but hardening around a core of sheer, unadulterated will. She thought about her job, a trauma nurse. She had seen the geography of human pain mapped out in blood and bone. She had held hands with the dying and looked into the eyes of people whose worlds had been obliterated in the space of a single screeching tire or a misplaced step. She knew what real crisis was. This was just noise. A pathetic, desperate noise. Her eyes, a cool and steady gray, lifted from the knot of his tie and scanned the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Conversations hummed, a low-frequency vibration of power and influence. And then she saw him. Or rather, she saw the moment coalesce around him. He was a man standing alone near the arched entrance to the terrace, partially obscured by a marble column. He was not remarkable in the way the other peacocks of industry were. He was not laughing loudly or gesturing with a champagne flute. He was simply still, a point of absolute gravity in a room of frantic motion. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. His presence was a negative declaration. He was not performing. He was not posturing. He was not trying. He simply was. And across the room, another man was moving. This one moved with a different kind of energy, a skittering, predatory focus. His hand was inside his catering jacket. His eyes were fixed on the still man by the column. Alara's mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, to triage a dozen injuries in seconds, saw the trajectory, the intent, the inevitable conclusion. The world did not slow down. It sharpened. Marcus was still talking. "Think you can just walk away with nothing? Everything you have is because of me." The predator's hand came out of his jacket. The object in it was small, dark, and absolute. Alara's training screamed. Her body, coiled with the unspent energy of a year of swallowed fear, finally acted. It was not a thought. It was an instinct, pure and undeniable. Triage. The greatest threat. The most immediate danger. It wasn't Marcus. It was the man with the gun. The target was the still point of gravity by the column. She did not scream. She did not hesitate. She moved. She ripped her arm from Marcus's grasp with a strength that shocked them both. She took 2 long, lunging steps, a frantic, desperate dance across the polished marble. She didn't have time to shout a warning. There was only time for intervention. physical, final. She threw her body sideways, a frantic shove aimed at the still man's chest. "Get down!" The words were a ragged burst of air from her lungs, her palm connected with the fine wool of his suit. He was solid, unyielding as the column behind him, but her momentum was enough. He stumbled back, his expression of quiet observation finally breaking into surprise. And then the sound. A flat, ugly pop that was instantly devoured by the cavernous room. It was followed by a searing, white-hot line of pain that tore through her side. It felt like being struck by lightning, a profound electrical shock that stole her breath and threw her to the floor. Her emerald gown, a dress Marcus had insisted she buy, pooled around her. She felt the warmth first, a wet, spreading heat against her skin. She looked down. A dark flower was blooming on the green silk, its petals unfurling with shocking speed. The humming of the room ceased. A collective gasp was followed by a wave of screams. Chaos erupted. People ran. Glass shattered. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, his petty tyranny instantly rendered absurd. Her vision began to tunnel. The last thing she saw was the man she had pushed. He was no longer still. He was moving toward her, his face a canvas of unreadable emotion. His quiet, structural power was reasserting itself over the chaos. Security, men in dark suits with the same stillness he possessed, materialized around him, forming a perimeter. One of them had the shooter on the ground. It was handled. He knelt beside her, his movements economical and precise. He did not rush. He was not panicking. His dark eyes met hers. He was looking at her, really looking at her, with an intensity that pierced through the fog of pain. He took off his suit jacket and pressed it against the wound. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was low and calm, a stark contrast to the pandemonium. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. "You're safe," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of fact, a promise already being kept. She tried to answer, to tell him it was her job, that it was instinct, that it was what she did. But the words wouldn't form. The world was a smear of light and sound, and the only fixed point was the pressure of his hands and the absolute certainty in his dark, quiet eyes. Then, even that faded, and the silence she had been craving for so long finally came. It was not the kind of silence that echoes. It was the kind that settles, deep and dark and total. She woke to the color beige, a soft, buttery, impossibly expensive shade of beige that coated the walls, the ceiling, the thick pile carpet. It was the color of quiet money. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something clean and floral like freesias. A gentle, rhythmic beeping sounded to her left, a familiar lullaby from her professional life, but the machine it came from was sleeker, more advanced than anything at St. Jude's. Pain was a dull, throbbing ache in her right side, a localized storm in an otherwise calm sea. She was in a bed, the sheets a thread, count her own skin had never before registered. She tried to sit up, and a fresh, sharp spike of pain made her gasp and fall back against the pillows. "I wouldn't," a low voice said. She turned her head. He was there, the man from the gala. He was sitting in a plush armchair near the window, a book open but unread in his lap. He was wearing another suit, this one a deep navy blue that made the charcoal one from the previous night seem almost casual. He was just as still as she remembered, a study in contained energy. The only thing moving was his gaze, which was fixed on her. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice was scratchy. "A private wing of the Hunnell Medical Center," he answered. "My family's hospital." Her mind, still foggy, latched onto the name. Hunnell, Sky, one of the largest, most advanced medical conglomerates in Asia, with a growing, formidable presence in the United States. St. Jude's was a dingy county facility in comparison. "Who are you?" He closed the book, the sound a soft thud in the quiet room. My name is Jinwoo Kwan. He said it simply, as if it should mean something. It didn't, not to her. But the name of the hospital did. He watched her process this, his expression patient. He had the kind of patience that came not from kindness, but from the absolute certainty that he could outweigh any obstacle. You saved my life, Miss Vance, he continued, his voice even. I am in your debt. Ilara, she corrected, a reflex. She didn't know why, but she needed him to use her name. She needed to be a person, not a file. How do you know my name? I make it a point to know who my employees are, especially the exceptional ones. The fog in her brain began to clear, replaced by a cold wave of confusion. I don't work for you. The Kwan Corporation became the primary benefactor of St. Jude's General Hospital 6 months ago, he stated, a simple delivery of a tectonic fact. Technically, everyone who works there works for me. I review the quarterly performance reports, commendations, incident logs. Your name appears more often than any other nurse in the trauma department. For competence, for grace under pressure, for de-escalating volatile situations. Your file is impressive. She stared at him. This man, this quiet sovereign from the gala, had been reading about her. He had not just seen her, he had been observing her from a distance, through the sterile medium of reports and data. He had known who she was before she had thrown herself in front of him. The thought was deeply unsettling, a strange violation and, perversely, a form of validation she had never known. And Dr. Thorne? He asked, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. It was colder now. Is he also in your file? The name landed like a stone in the quiet room. Shame, hot and familiar, washed over her. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like this, a man who reviewed hospital incident logs, would know about the times security had been called to the parking lot, the hushed complaints from other nurses, the carefully worded reports she herself had filed and then withdrawn under pressure from Marcus. He had not updated the file on her. He had the complete, unabridged, annotated version. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The answer was in the sudden tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze fell to the perfect crease in the beige blanket. He is no longer your concern, Jinwoo said. The finality in his voice was absolute. It was not a threat. It was a weather report for a storm that had already passed. His hospital privileges have been indefinitely suspended pending a full conduct review by the board, a board which, I should add, I appointed. Ilara felt a disorienting mix of emotions, the sharp terror of her private life being so thoroughly exposed, and the dizzying relief of a weight she had been carrying for years being lifted by a stranger. He had seen the whole ugly mess, the parts of her life she kept hidden and polished over, and he had not judged. He had simply handled it. You didn't have to do that, she whispered, though a part of her was screaming with gratitude. Yes, I did, he countered, his voice softening slightly. There are certain standards. Dr. Thorne does not meet them. He has not met them for a long time. The system that allowed him to persist was flawed. I am correcting the flaw. It was so simple, so corporate. He spoke of ruining a man's career as if he were debugging a line of code. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. This was his power. Not the loud, brittle power of Marcus's rage, but a deep, quiet, structural power that could rewrite reality with a phone call. What about the man who shot me? She asked, needing to change the subject, to move away from the raw nerve of Marcus. He has been interviewed, Jinwoo said, and the slight pause he took was filled with a chilling implication. He was a hired professional. His employer was a business rival of mine. That situation is also being handled. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. No one will ever threaten you or me again. You have my word. She lay there, a patient in a beige room, her body aching, her life irrevocably altered. A man she had saved was now her protector. He had seen her competence, her weakness, her bravery, and her shame. He had seen all of it, and he was still sitting there, a still point of gravity in her chaotic world. "I need you to rest now, Ilara," he said, standing up. He was tall, his frame lean but solid beneath the immaculate suit. "My personal physician, Dr. Kim, will be in to check on you. Your security detail is posted outside the door. Nothing and no one will get in without my authorization." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you," he said. It was not effusive. It was a simple, profound statement of fact. He was thanking her not just for saving his life, but for being who she was, for being the person his data had told him she was. He left, and the silence that filled the room was different from the one that had followed her collapse. This was not an absence. It was a presence. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, the kind that feels, for the first time in a very long time, like safety. The days that followed unfolded in a rhythm of quiet care. Dr. Kim was a gentle, older man with kind eyes who spoke to her as a colleague, explaining every detail of her recovery. The bullet had torn through muscle and thankfully missed any major organs. The surgery had been clean. Recovery would be a matter of time and rest. Nurses came and went, efficient and discreet. They moved with a quiet professionalism that bordered on reverence, their demeanor subtly influenced by the fact that they were caring for the woman who had saved the chairman. They were ghosts in crisp white uniforms, ensuring her comfort without intrusion. Jin-woo was a constant quiet presence. He did not hover, but he was always there. He would arrive in the morning, a different impeccably tailored suit every day, and sit in the armchair by the window. He would work on a tablet, his fingers moving silently across the glass screen. He never took calls in her room. He would simply excuse himself, and she would hear the low murmur of his voice in the hallway before he returned, his composure perfectly intact. They rarely spoke for the first few days. The silence was a space for her to heal. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was companionable. She would watch him, study the way he held himself, the intense focus in his eyes when he read, the subtle line of his jaw when he was concentrating. He was a man accustomed to command, yet in her presence, he simply existed. He made no demands. He asked for nothing. He was just there. One afternoon, he looked up from his tablet. "You're bored," he stated. She was. The pain had subsided to a manageable ache, and the enforced stillness was beginning to feel like a cage. "A little," she admitted. He set the tablet aside. "I am in the process of establishing a new philanthropic entity, the Kwan Global Medical Foundation. Its purpose will be to fund under-resourced hospitals and clinics in high-need areas, and to develop rapid response medical teams for disaster zones." He paused. "I find myself in need of an expert opinion on the charter for the response teams, specifically regarding triage protocols and personnel requirements." Ilara stared at him. He was asking for her help, not as a patient, not as a woman he felt indebted to, but as a professional, an expert. He was seeing her competence, the very thing Marcus had always used and belittled in equal measure. I could look at it," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "My assistant will bring you the files." An hour later, a man named Mr. Park entered the room. He was a younger, leaner version of Jin-woo, dressed in a similarly sharp suit, his face a mask of polite efficiency. He bowed slightly to Ilara and placed a thin, sleek tablet on her bedside table. "The chairman asked me to provide you with the preliminary charter for the GMF, Miss Vance. He has granted you Level 3 access to the project files." "Thank you, Mr. Park," she said, intrigued by the formal classification. "The chairman also asked me to inform you that Dr. Thorne attempted to access the hospital this morning. He was denied entry. He has also filed a motion with the court claiming emotional distress," Mr. Park said, his tone perfectly neutral, but Ilara could detect a flicker of contempt in his eyes. "Our legal team is handling it. It is not a concern." He bowed again and left as silently as he had arrived. Ilara picked up the tablet. For a moment, the news about Marcus sent a familiar spike of anxiety through her. The lawsuit, the audacity. But it was distant now, a problem happening in another world. A world Jinwoo's quiet, structural power was methodically dismantling on her behalf. She opened the file. It was a world of logistics, protocols, and mission statements. It was the language she understood. For the next 3 hours, she was not a patient. She was not a victim. She was a nurse, a professional, her mind sharp and focused. She read through the charter, her fingers flying across the screen, making notes, highlighting inconsistencies, suggesting improvements. The protocols were good, but they were theoretical, written by people who had never had to make a life or death decision with 3 critical patients and only enough supplies for one. She rewrote the section on field triage, her words precise and direct, born from years of hard-won experience. When Jinwoo returned that evening, he found her asleep, the tablet resting on her chest. He quietly took it and went back to his chair. He opened the file and began to read her notes. He read every word she had written. He saw the clarity of her logic, the fierce pragmatism, the deep, unspoken empathy that informed every suggestion. She had not just corrected the file. She had given it a soul. She had infused it with the very grace under pressure that her own file had described. He looked over at her, her face soft in sleep. The lines of pain and exhaustion eased for the first time. He had been drawn to the data of her competence, but he was becoming captivated by the reality of her character. The debt he owed her was not something that could be repaid with safety and comfort. It was becoming something else entirely, something he had not anticipated. The next day, she was cleared to leave the hospital, not to go back to her small empty apartment, the one Marcus knew the location of, but to a place of Jinwoo's choosing. "It's a temporary arrangement," he said, as a black car with tinted windows whisked them through the city. "Until the legal matters with Dr. Thorne are fully resolved, and your safety can be absolutely guaranteed." Alara looked out the window, the city lights a blur. She felt a prickle of resistance. "Mr. Kwan, Jinwoo, I appreciate everything you've done, more than I can say, but I can't let you just manage my life. I'm not your responsibility." It was a necessary boundary, a reclamation of her own agency. He did not look away from the road ahead. His profile was sharp, defined against the fleeting lights. "When you pushed me out of the way, you made a choice. You intervened. You took an action that had consequences. One of those consequences is that your life is now intertwined with mine. I am not managing your life, Ilara. I am managing a variable in a security situation that you are now a part of. It is logical. It is necessary." "And when it's not necessary anymore?" she asked, her voice quiet. He finally turned to look at her, his gaze direct. "Then we will have a different conversation." The car was silent for a long moment. "I have no interest in a cage, gilded or otherwise, for you. I am interested in your opinion on the GMF charter. I am interested in what a person who would trade her life for a stranger's thinks about the world. The rest is simply logistics." His honesty was disarming. He framed everything in the language of logic and business, stripping it of the messy, suffocating sentimentality Marcus had always used to manipulate her. With Marcus, "I'm worried about you," meant, "do what I say." With Jinwoo, "your safety is a logistical necessity," meant, "you are safe." It was a language she was beginning to understand and to trust. The car pulled up to a set of high, unmarked gates that slid open silently. They drove down a long, tree-lined drive to a house that was less a house and more a work of modern art. All glass and steel and clean lines, overlooking a bluff with a panoramic view of the ocean. An older woman was waiting for them at the door. She was elegant, her hair a perfect silver coif, her eyes holding the same intelligent stillness as her son's. "Mother," Jinwoo said, bowing his head slightly. "This is Ilara Vance." Mrs. Kwan's eyes, sharp and discerning, swept over Ilara. They were not cold, but they missed nothing. She saw the lingering paleness from the hospital, the strength in her posture, the wariness in her gaze. She stepped forward and took Alara's hands in her own. Her skin was soft, her grip surprisingly firm. The woman who was brave enough to save my foolish son and smart enough to leave a man like that doctor, Mrs. Kwan said, her English perfect and melodic. It is an honor to welcome you to our home. You will be safe here. You will heal here. She looked at her son. She is already annoyed with you. She gets that from me. Jin Woo's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. I'm aware. Alara felt a laugh bubble up inside her, a genuine startled sound. In the face of this formidable, wry woman, her carefully constructed walls of resistance began to feel unnecessary. This was not a prison. It was a sanctuary, and Mrs. Kwan was its keeper. Come, the older woman said, leading her inside. I've had the kitchen make jjajangmyeon. It's good for the soul. And you, she said, glancing back at Jin Woo, have paperwork to do. Don't bother us. As Ilara followed Mrs. Kwan into the warm, bright house, leaving Jin Woo standing in the cool entryway, she felt a profound shift. She was not being handled. She was being welcomed. The exhaustion that had been her constant companion for years began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile, but unmistakable feeling of peace. Life in the glass house on the cliff was a strange and restorative dream. Ilara spent her days in the company of Mrs. Kwan, a woman whose quiet wisdom and dry wit were a constant source of comfort and surprise. They would walk in the meticulously kept gardens, Mrs. Kwan pointing out different plants and telling her their Korean names, her stories weaving a tapestry of a life lived with grace and steel. She never asked Ilara about Marcus. She never pried into the painful corners of her past. Instead, she spoke to Ilara as if her strength and worth were self-evident facts. A person's character is not revealed in the grand gestures, Mrs. Kwan said one afternoon as they sat on the terrace watching the sun glitter on the Pacific. It is in the small, consistent choices, the choice to be kind when it is not required, the choice to be competent when no one is watching, the choice to leave when one's spirit is being eroded. Your character, my dear, is very clear. This quiet, unconditional validation was more healing than any medicine. It was the antidote to years of Marcus's insidious poison, the constant chipping away at her confidence, the narrative that she was difficult, ungrateful, lucky to have him. Here, in this house of quiet sovereigns, she was simply seen correctly. Her work on the GMF charter became her focus. Jin Woo had a full office set up for her, complete with a panoramic window overlooking the sea. He would send her files through Mr. Park, proposals for mobile surgical units, supply chain logistics for vaccine distribution, personnel vetting protocols. He didn't just want her opinion, he wanted her expertise. They fell into a professional rhythm. She would deconstruct his team's polished theoretical plans and rebuild them with the hard-won practicality of someone who knew the chaotic reality of a trauma bay. He would come to the house in the evenings, and they would have dinner together with his mother. The conversations were never forced. They spoke of medicine, of global politics, of art. He would ask her questions, his head tilted slightly, listening to her answers with an unnerving intensity. He was not just hearing her words. He was analyzing them, filing them away. He was building a new file on her, one based on direct observation, and she found she did not mind. One evening, after his mother had retired, they sat alone on the terrace. The sea air was cool. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, a rare crack in his immaculate armor. "The Board of St. Jude's has formally requested your presence at the Obsidian Gala next month," he said, his voice neutral. "They wish to honor you for your actions." Ilara stiffened. The thought of a public event, of being the center of attention, was terrifying. "I don't need to be honored." "I know," he said. "But the foundation, the GMF, is being formally announced that night. I will be giving the keynote address. I would like you to be there, with me." It wasn't a command, but it was not quite a request either. It was a statement of desired outcome. I intend to introduce you as the Foundation's new Director of Field Operations and Protocol." She was stunned into silence. Director. It was a title, a position of immense responsibility and authority. He wasn't offering her a job, he was acknowledging the job she was already doing. He was giving her a platform, a structure for her competence. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he said simply. "It is the logical next step. Your work on the charter has been transformative. You are the most qualified person for the role. It is a matter of placing the most effective asset in the correct position." Asset. Position. The corporate language should have been cold, but it wasn't. It was his way of saying he saw her value. It was the highest compliment he could pay. "Okay," she said, the word small but firm. "Yes." He nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good." He looked out at the dark water. Dr. Thorne's lawsuit was dismissed this morning. Lack of merit. His legal team has dropped him as a client, citing creative differences. Ilara absorbed this. Another problem, erased. And him? He remains persistent, Jin Woo said, a hint of something cold in his voice. He has been making inquiries, hiring private investigators. He is operating under the delusion that you are a damsel in distress, and he is the hero of this story. He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He does not understand you, and he fundamentally misunderstands me. From his hollowed-out corner of the world, Marcus Thorne seethed. His universe had shrunk with breathtaking speed. The suspension from St. Jude's had become a termination. The whispers about his conduct had become a formal investigation by the medical board. His portfolio, once a source of smug satisfaction, was hemorrhaging value as the small, innovative medical companies he'd invested in were either acquired by a massive, faceless conglomerate or found their supply contracts inexplicably canceled. He sat in the dark of his penthouse, the glittering city lights outside a mockery of his own dimming future. He was convinced this was all Kwan's doing. This silent, arrogant foreigner who had appeared out of nowhere and stolen Ilara. He saw it all as a twisted corporate takeover, with Ilara as the prize asset. "He's holding her captive," Marcus told his new lawyer, a slick, bottom-feeding creature who specialized in hopeless cases. "She's terrified. She saved his life, and he's taken her. It's Stockholm Syndrome." The lawyer, whose name was Rick, looked skeptical. "The PIS can't get within a mile of the estate, Marcus. The security is off the charts, and our motion was laughed out of court. We have nothing." "We have the truth?" Marcus insisted, pacing his vast living room. "She loved me. She needs me. He has her brainwashed. Give her 3 days away from him, and she'll be begging to come back. I know her." He did not know her. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. He saw her quietness as weakness, her endurance as acceptance. He could not conceive of the steel that lay beneath her grace. He could not comprehend that she had not been taken, but had been offered a sanctuary she had quietly, deliberately chosen. His arrogance was a blindfold, preventing him from seeing the truth. Ilara was not a victim to be rescued. She was a survivor who had finally found an ally. His desperation festered, metastasizing into a plan. A stupid, grand, and fatally flawed plan. He learned about the Obsidian Gala, the highlight of the city's social calendar, hosted by the Kwan Corporation. He knew Ilara would be there. Kwan would want to show her off, his new prize. This would be his stage. He would confront them. He would expose Kwan for the monster he was, a gangster hiding in a suit. He would appeal to Ilara, publicly, dramatically. He would be her knight in shining armor, and the world would see. The narrative would shift back to his control. He would be the hero once more. It was a fantasy, a script written by a man whose ego could not accept the reality of his own obsolescence. He pulled strings, called in old favors, and bribed a caterer to get an invitation. He was convinced he was sneaking into the lion's den. He had no idea the lion had left the door open for him on purpose. The Obsidian Gala was held in the grand atrium of the Kwan Tower. a soaring space of black marble and glass that felt less like a building and more like a cathedral dedicated to commerce. The ceiling was 100 feet high, and the city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation. The air hummed with the quiet, confident buzz of the truly powerful. Ilara stood beside Jinwoo near the edge of the main platform, looking out over the assembled guests. She wore a gown the color of midnight, a stark, architecturally precise dress that was both elegant and severe. It was her choice. It was not the soft emerald of her last gala. It was the color of armor. For the first time in her life, she felt correctly placed. She was not an accessory on a powerful man's arm. She was a powerful woman standing next to her partner. Her fear had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the corrosive dread of Marcus's moods. It was the clean, sharp anxiety of a new and immense responsibility. The GMF director. The titles felt foreign, but the work felt like home. Jinwoo was, as always, a point of calm in the swirling room. He wore a black tuxedo that was a masterwork of tailoring, but it was his stillness that commanded attention. He hadn't spoken much, but his presence beside her was a solid, unwavering anchor. He would occasionally point out a key figure in the crowd, a senator, a tech billionaire, a rival CEO, giving her a quiet, two-sentence summary of their importance and their weakness. He was giving her a map of his world. "Are you ready?" he asked her, his voice a low murmur against the sound of the string quartet. "Yes," she said, and she meant it. Then she saw him. Marcus was making his way through the crowd, his face a mask of righteous fury. He looked frantic, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his eyes wild. He was a discordant note in a perfectly composed symphony. The guests, sensing the shift in energy, began to part before him, their polite conversations faltering. He stopped a few feet from them, his chest heaving. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice filled with a performative relief. "Thank God, I'm here. I'm getting you out of here." Ilara did not flinch. She did not look to Jinwoo for help. She looked directly at the man who had haunted her for years, and she felt nothing. Just a profound, weary pity. "There's nothing for you here, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and steady. It carried in the sudden silence of the atrium. His face contorted in disbelief. "Don't you understand? This man is dangerous. He's a criminal. He has you trapped. Just come with me. We'll sort this out." He took a step forward, his hand outstretched, reaching for her. "Let go of my arm," she had once said to him in a hospital corridor, her voice a whisper. She had spent years asking, pleading. This time, she did not have to say a word. Jinwoo moved. It was not a large movement. He simply shifted his body, placing himself partially in front of her. It was a subtle, final barrier. "Dr. Thorne," Jinwoo said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The entire atrium was silent now, watching. "You seem to be operating from an outdated file." Marcus ignored him, his eyes locked on Ilara. "Ilara, you have an obligation to me. After everything I've given you—" "Let's talk about what you've been given, Doctor," Jinwoo interrupted, his tone dangerously soft. "Let's talk about the research grants you received, funded by anonymous donors. My donors. Let's talk about the glowing performance reviews written by department heads who owed me favors. You were not a great surgeon, Dr. Thorne. You were a mediocre one, propped up by a system I controlled. You were a project, a test of whether a flawed asset could be made functional." Marcus stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the structure of your reality," Jinwoo continued, his voice as calm and cutting as a scalpel. "You believed you were powerful. You were merely well managed, but your behavior became a liability. Your treatment of Miss Vance, in particular, was an unacceptable deviation from protocol. So I corrected the error." Mr. Park materialized at Jinwoo's side, holding a tablet. Jinwoo took it without looking away from Marcus. 3 months ago, Jinwoo said, his voice a clinical monotone, Quan Industries, through a series of subsidiary holding companies, acquired a controlling interest in the three largest medical supply chains in this region, the same ones your investment portfolio was heavily leveraged in. As of 9 a.m. this morning, we called in their debts. Your portfolio was wiped out. He swiped the screen. 2 months ago, we purchased the primary mortgage on St. Jude's General Hospital. The board that terminated your employment? My board. The ethics investigation that is recommending the permanent revocation of your medical license? My investigation. The evidence was extensive. He swiped the screen again. The private investigator you hired? He's worked for me for 10 years. His reports to you were edited. His reports to me were very thorough. They include recordings, your threats, your delusions, your confession to falsifying patient records to discredit a rival. The district attorney's office has expressed a keen interest in them. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Marcus Thorne's life. He was being dismantled piece by piece in front of a silent audience of the most powerful people in the city. The performative power he had wielded for so long was revealed for what it was: a hollow shell, a borrowed costume. Marcus's face had gone from red to a waxy, bloodless white. His arrogance, the central pillar of his identity, crumbled. It did not just crack, it turned to dust. No, he whispered. It was the sound of a man watching his own world burn to the ground. No, Ilara, tell them. He turned to her, his eyes begging. He was no longer the tyrant. He was a child, seeking shelter from a storm he could not comprehend. Ilara looked at him, at the ruin of a man who had caused her so much pain. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the cold, clean finality of an ending. "There's nothing to tell," she said. "He's right. It's over." That was the final blow. The last support gave way. Marcus Thorne's body seemed to fold in on itself. A terrible, guttural sob escaped his lips. He dropped to his knees on the black marble floor, his body shaking with racking, uncontrollable sobs. He had not been defeated. He had been erased. Jinwoo watched him for a moment, his expression devoid of emotion. He was not gloating. He was simply observing the result of a calculated action. He gave a slight nod. 2 of his security men moved forward, their movements efficient and without wasted motion. They gently, firmly, lifted Marcus to his feet and escorted him away, his sobs echoing in the vast, silent hall. The show was over. Jinwoo turned back to the silent, watching crowd. He took the microphone from the nearby lectern. His voice, calm and steady, filled the atrium. "My apologies for the interruption," he said. "Some old business required finalization." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room before landing on Ilara. He held out his hand to her. She took it. His grip was warm and firm. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate the future of medicine, a future built not on ego, but on efficacy, not on reputation, but on results." He looked at Ilara, and for the first time in front of everyone, a genuine warmth filled his eyes. True strength is not loud. True brilliance is often quiet. For the past 6 months, my team and I have been developing the charter for a new global foundation. But the soul of that foundation, its core of practical, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent protocol, came from one person. He turned to face the audience fully, his hand still holding hers. "Many of you tonight wanted to honor Miss Ilara Vance for an act of bravery, but her value is not contained in a single moment. It is in the quiet competence she has displayed every day of her career. She has been the most capable person in every room she has ever been in, and it is a failure of the systems around her that it has taken this long for her to be recognized." He raised her hand slightly. "It is my profound honor to introduce you to the heart of the Kwan Global Medical Foundation, my partner and its new director of field operations, Ilara Vance." A wave of applause, startled at first, then thunderous, filled the room. It washed over Ilara, a sound of validation so total and public it was dizzying. She looked at Jinwoo, at the man who had seen her file, and then looked past it to see her. He had not rescued her. He had armed her. He had given her a stage, a title, and a microphone, And then he had stood back to let her speak in the language she knew best, the language of competence. Later, they stood on the private balcony of his office on the tower's top floor. The gala was a distant murmur below them. The city spread out before them, a glittering, endless promise. The silence between them was no longer just comfortable, it was alive. Ilara finally let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. A real smile reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. The weight of Marcus, of the past, of being underestimated and unseen, was finally gone. It had not just been lifted, it had been atomized. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, looking out at the lights. "The public evisceration." "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice low beside her. "Some diseases cannot be cured, they must be excised, completely. So they cannot grow back." He turned to her. It was never about punishing him. It was about ensuring your absolute peace. Peace. It was a word she had only understood as a concept, an absence of conflict. Now, for the first time, she felt it as a presence, a warm, steady light inside her. It was the feeling of being correctly placed in the universe. She thought about the future. It was not a fairy tale. It was not a simple, happily ever after. It would be complicated and demanding. It would be a life of work, of purpose, of partnership with this quiet, formidable man. It was a future built not on fleeting passion, but on the bedrock of mutual respect and recognition. A family, she realized, could be built from honesty, complication, and the daily choice to stay. He didn't say, "I love you." He wouldn't. It wasn't his language. Instead, he looked at her, his expression serious, his dark eyes full of a quiet, steady light. "The first GMF field clinic," he said. "Sub-Saharan Africa. The supply chain logistics are a nightmare. I've been going over the projections. There's a flaw in the distribution model for the cold chain vaccines." He was asking for her help. He was turning to his partner. Ilara turned from the view and looked up at him, her quiet protector, her silent sovereign. Her smile was small, but it held the light of 1,000 suns. "I've already seen it," she said. "I have a few ideas. Some people will take your silence for weakness, your grace for compliance. They will build their entire world on the assumption that you are a supporting character in their story. But strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, unwavering endurance of a woman who knows her own worth, even when no one else sees it. And sometimes all it takes is one person who knows how to read the data correctly, to give that quiet strength the power to change the world. What comes next for Ilara and Jinwoo is not an ending, but the beginning of an empire built on respect, competence, and the kind of love that is proven not in words, but in action. The story of the foundation is just beginning.